Deep Dive with Vanessa Mdee is brought to you by the African Creative Agency in partnership with producer and show creator Amanda Rosenberg.
He likes kente, I prefer kitenge. He dances to the tumba, I swing to the zeze. We both agree For Your Case by Tenny is our favorite African song of the moment. He does the zanku, I do the tetema. He loves the belly of the beast, Lagos City. I live in the haven of peace, Dar es Salaam. He grew up in LA, I grew up in NYC. Bowling over fishing, nachos over gumbo. He's from the West Coast, I'm from the East Coast of Africa. Nakupenda in Swahili, ahuru mginanya in Igbo. One thing that's very similar is we are global citizens, citizens of the world. African because Africa lives within us. Our narrative is similar. We are more alike than we are different. This is my African brother. Deep Dive with me, Vanessa Mdee. So we're discussing African influence on global culture. And I start each of my podcasts with a poem. But I wanted this particular poem to be a little bit different. I asked you questions that were based around the fact that you're African, but you're a global African in the sense that you are based and live and work in the United States. And as much as you have a lot of African influence, you're very much aware of the global scene. So I'd like to invite my guest today, Ugo Mozie.
Yo, yo. It's a pleasure to be here, We're vibing out on this comfy couch. I feel at home, so anything could be said today.
And anything, it's a great setting for you to feel at home, so please feel at home and feel free to discuss it freely and fully and feel like this is a place of complete security.
Thank you for having me.
Where does Mozie come from?
Mozie comes from the Igbo heritage in Nigeria. It's a last name that was passed down from centuries. My great-grandfather had the last name, and now I have it. My dad and my grandfather and I actually are all Ugo Mozie, so I'm the third generation.
Oh, wow. Mozie the third. That sounds very like a monarchy.
I like that.
So the first time I met Ugo, and this is something that, a lot of people don't know. So I'm going to take you back to the year. Let's go all the way back. I was an on-air personality on MTV, and I was working on a unique show called MTV Base Meets. And so we were looking at meeting exceptional human beings from across the globe, be they in Africa, America, in Europe, in Asia, wherever. And basically, we'd sit down with this inspirational person and have a conversation with them. But within the conversational space, we would invite Africans in that region that were doing some cool things, right? The first episode had former two-time Nigerian president Obasanjo. The second episode had Russell Simmons, so we shot it in New York City. The third episode had Akon. We shot it right here in LA. And the fourth episode had the lovely supermodel Alec Weck. And part of the panel who was discussing with us was my darling friend Ugo. Now, I had to do a lot of research on our panelists or our, people who are going to join me on this interview. I'd never heard of Ugo before, but I just, the producer was like, oh my God, he's doing exceptional stuff in fashion, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, let's meet him.
That's funny. And
he walked in the door and I was like, of course. Like top to bottom. First of all, you're a beautiful man. I'm happy to call you my friend, okay?
Okay. The feeling is mutual. My beautiful queen over here. Yo.
Anyway, Ugo walked in the door. We had a beautiful session, and from then on, Ugo went from strength to strength, obviously as a style icon, a fashion designer, as I know you do occasionally and a lot too, now more so often, as a stylist, as an influencer, and most recently now a social entrepreneur and even an activist, right? Am I forgetting something?
I mean, you nailed it. I think you pretty much nailed it.
I follow you on Instagram.
The main ones. Yeah, it's been a journey, definitely.
it's been a real journey, and you know, for me, it's been really nice to see you as part of the culture here, but very much part of the culture back at home. You're still very much the reference point to me every time I need something in the fashion industry and otherwise. And I'll call you occasionally and be like, oh, I'm frustrated. I don't have enough. Can you help me find the right stuff? And always, you know, always there to help. And I know we're going to do more in the future.
Definitely.
But based on this topic, I think that you're the right person to have this conversation with, because when we talk about African culture, where we're at right now, and how much it is a desirable thing to be associated with Africa right now, it makes me almost cringe sometimes, because we've been African all our lives. We've been part of the culture.
Now it's trendy.
Exactly. It's trendy now.
Trendy.
And that's annoying. I hate that. And I you know, I have this conversation with so many people, and I feel like now, just to set our first part of this conversation up, I remember when reggaeton started to seep into the mainstream market. Reggaeton was, like everything you were hearing on the radio. Everyone took a dive in the reggaeton. Beyonce.
Everyone.
You know, you name it. And Sean Paul was the guy. Like, he was the guy. He was like the pioneer, and then everything came into America and the world. And now I'm feeling like it's I'm going to use the word afropop, because Afrobeats is specific to a particular region. We'll explain this a little later too. But I want to hear your opinions, firstly, on the African influence in your market and what your opinions are. Yeah.
Definitely. You made very strong points, and I can agree with you on this, on Africa being a current trend all around entertainment, from fashion to music to even television and movies. Last year, Netflix bought its first African film, Lionheart with Genevieve. You know, so it's definitely a rise in the demand for Africa. You know, and you can thank Black Panther for a bit of that, for starting the conversation. But what it is, there's still a lack of authenticity with what's being pushed out and what's coming out. You know, Vogue is still going to Africa and paying photographers $100 for their huge campaigns. Valentino's still going to Lagos and hiring local photographers and paying them nothing for their campaigns. They pay Mario Testino $250,000 for. You know, it's still happening today. And I think that as the pioneers of all things Africa, that's been doing it since day one, it's our duty now and our job to run through the open doors, because these doors weren't always open for us. You know, it was a lot harder for us to have these conversations and find people that are trying to talk about Black power and African empowerment. And now that the ears are open for the conversation, it's our job to really push it, because by the time we know it, you'll go to Tanzania and you'll find that the Chinese and the Indians and the Russians have built infrastructure there. That's what's happening right now all over Africa. You know, like it's in entertainment, it's becoming a trend, but in business, it's a bigger trend. Right. You know, it's an even bigger trend. The amount of companies from Google to Sony and Universal, the record labels, that are all now trying to get that African wave and hop in the money. You know, for me, it's really important now more than ever to create more things to tell the story.
Can you identify a year or a time or a space or a moment in which you thought this is the time and like that you noticed the change? Because you mentioned that before you would walk into these interviews or these spaces and speak Africa and share that narrative, and people were not like super receptive. Right. Can you pinpoint, even if it's a personal moment for you?
One of the pivotal moments when I realized that there was an impact or a shift in the conversation was 2 or 3 years ago, when I was working with Dolce & Gabbana in Milan, and each season I helped them curate their list of influencers and people to bring to their shows. I've done this for Balmain and Givenchy and Dior for years, and for the first time, Dolce was like, hey, do you have any African artists that we can have walk in the show? I was like, wow, really? African artists? And at the time, I was working with WizKids, so I introduced him to the conversation right away, and they were like, let's do it. Like, they were down.
Wow.
And for me, it was the first time I've lived in Paris and worked in Paris, worked in Milan, worked in London, and I've never, like, had anybody request an African artist for anything. So that was what I knew there was a conversation change.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And what is your first reaction now for the WizKids and the Vanessas and for the pioneers of the African movement? Like, how do you feel like we can protect what it is that we've been working so hard to build? Like, what do we do?
The way for us to protect what we have is honestly to manage it and guard it properly. You know, we have to understand the leverage that we have now in the world, knowing that we are the gatekeepers of the authenticity of the culture.
Right.
Like, we need to continuously stand strong and push that, you know, be able to shed light on our countries, our regions, our continent on a way other people can't, you know.
Yeah.
Film movies there, film documentaries there, show things that people haven't seen before. You know, I think it's really about owning the content that's coming out of Africa. You know, as the Africans, you know, will obviously travel the world and work the world, but when it comes to the African content and story and narrative, we have to prove that, you know, not only do we know the story, but we're pushing the stories.
Right.
Because that's the highest form of control.
Right. When you own the content
storytelling.
and do the stories. Yeah.
Like, that's what we're lacking the most as Africans is the documentation and storytelling of our history.
I think I totally agree with you on that front, and that's a very valid point. But I also think that our biggest issue sometimes, and you said we need to protect it, I feel like I'll speak for myself, I'll speak for a lot of East Tanzanians. We come from such a background of colonization. So anything that is presented to us by someone foreign, be they Asian, European, American,
glitters more.
Yo, it glitters. It glitters. So people will like wholeheartedly support a Rihanna record over a Vanessa record, and they'll say to me, "No, but you sing too much in English." I say, "Rihanna sing English all the time. You buy the record, you know the lyrics."
Right.
You know what I mean? So there's a lot of praising and what's the word? I forget it right now. But what is this something that you experienced in West Africa, first of all, before I proceed to ask you this question? Because you might not even know what I'm talking about.
100%.
Right.
I feel like, yeah, they love Western validation.
Right.
They admire Western validation, Western credibility more than anything. For example, I was in Lagos in December, and you know, no shame to anybody or anyone's career, but this huge bank had a big concert, and they brought in Bobby Valentino as the guest star. I'm like, okay, like, of all people, just because he has a record like there was a mainstream years ago, that's great, but like they still value him more than like paying somebody else on the ground that can bring a better show, a better performer. I think we still value a certain thing about the West, and they put it over ourselves. Right. You know, I feel like we have to be our own biggest supporters first. We have to be the ones to really empower ourselves first. You know?
Yeah, and how do we teach that in our youth? You know, it's I feel like there's such a brainwash that has just swept over the continent, and there needs to be a lot more conversations about the problem.
Definitely. And I feel like the only way to teach it is through example. You know, it's through showing them through the actions, you know, through exposure. When it comes to the youth, like our kids and our youth are incredibly smart. Mm-hmm. They're all like sponges. These are the same kids that are able to build like mechanics off of a remote control, disassemble a cell phone and turn it into a walkie-talkie. Like, these kids are so smart.
Boy, who harness the wind.
They just need to be shown and be brought around things that can allow them to spark that interest, know that it's possible.
Right.
You know, that's why I try and do workshops in Lagos and in Ghana. I've done things in Uganda where I've brought in people from overseas and professionals to go out and just like interact with the kids and just talk to them, let them know that it's possible. You know, especially for me, like I was born in such a small town outside of Lagos, like a small town where, the average person is still there, and for me to have made it all the way from there to California, here with you, with the amazing Vanessa Mdee today, it's like, that's a blessing and it's possible. It's not impossible for you to think big and achieve big.
Right,
So
no, I agree.
it's about bringing it to them.
Take me back to your first experiences in the United States when you first came to California. I don't know, was this your first city?
Yeah, it was California.
So, yeah. Take me back to, first of all, take me through the process. Take me through the journey. You got on a plane from Lagos, I'm guessing, and you're moving to the United States, and you're here for the first time. What are some things that were culturally shocking to you? You were like, what's going on? And what are the things that people came up to you and asked, and you were like, what are you talking about?
I moved to LA pretty young. So I was around 4 years old.
Right.
So the immediate culture shock, I don't remember too much of, but I know, like, the first days of schools, like making my first friends and assimilating into the culture was definitely interesting. I don't know, for me it wasn't, I was different from all the other students, and I knew I was different, but something about it like gave me a sense of confidence. I had a choice to make at a very early age, because I already knew. I was like, yo, I'm coming to this whole new place. Like, I'm either gonna be an outsider, a weirdo, or a freak, or I'm gonna own it and not care and just do me. And I chose the latter. At an early age, I feel like that's what really made me who I am today, because I had a sense of identity from the start. I knew I was African. I knew my parents were African, and I knew I loved being African because my parents, again, kept me very grounded. From the first year we moved here, we went back all the time for the holidays. Like, my cousin Ifanyi, like him and I grew up together. I saw him every summer, every holiday. So I never, and the Africa that I saw and the Africa that people spoke about and showed on TV was so different. I never connected with the feed the hungry commercials or like, all these, I never tapped into that. So like, I never let it affect my confidence. I was a kid like, yo, that's not Africa. Like, this is Africa, showing them pictures of my house in the village.
Yeah, exactly.
Showing them like the pool that we were at, like showing them the lifestyle that we had. And, from like 8 years old, that was my conversations I was having with my friends, breaking these stigmas. And the biggest culture shock I had growing up was definitely moving from LA to Houston. So I moved to Houston when I was like 13 years old. And that was a culture shock because that was my first time being introduced to racism in America. Wow. And that was a whole nother thing for me. But we can talk about that later.
Okay.
Unless you want to bring it up now.
You could talk about it right now.
Okay. Cut it short?
No, a little bit. Could you do it?
I'll cut it short for sure.
No, you can talk about it.
Yeah.
Get into that.
But yeah, LA now is kind of similar to how it was back then, very liberal, cultural melting pot. So like, although you were the African kid, there was like the Indian kid and the Filipino kid in your class too. So it's like, it wasn't a place where you feel ostracized. Going to Texas, my parents moved there because my dad's business started doing really well, and there was better seaports there. So we moved there to be closer to that. And we went from living in Inglewood, California, to moving to like this suburban, predominantly white area of Texas. And that was different from me, being like not only the only African, but the only black kid in the class too at that, the only minority in the class at that. So that was my first time hearing like racist comments and all that. But again, I don't know, maybe it was God, but I just remember myself as a kid just not ever letting people's ideas or views on what they think of me affect who I know I am.
Right.
And, definitely there was hurtful times. There were times when they were like, oh, your nose is so big and things that sort as a kid, like that resonates. But it's like, I didn't let it stick. I didn't let it stick. I thought this was very interesting. Some of the worst times was even going into high school when I got my first car. My dad got me a car at the time, and I would get pulled over every morning going to school by the cops. And the first thing they'll ask is, whose car is this? Whose car are you driving? Because they just couldn't believe that a young black kid can be driving a nice car in the neighborhood. They thought it was stolen. Like I had to downsize my car because I was late to school every morning because I would always get pulled over all the time. So that was probably the worst I can say was, I would experience, because there's a lot more experiences when it comes to racism and stuff that that people have that I can't say I've experienced. But that was the biggest shock for me. And then after dealing with that, I knew that nothing anybody can do or say to me can affect my mind or my view. And I moved from Houston to New York, and that was the start of my career.
I remember this point in your career, 'cause this is what but at the same time, now you're moving into the fashion world. You've already experienced, like, from this move from Houston, New York, you're now in the fashion realm. You're working like fully in there, like you're finding your way through the business. More recently, we're noticing a lot of misappropriation with brands. There's been too much use of cultural. For us, we respect and love our culture, and it's important for us to, certain symbolism, certain patterns, a certain usage of images, and blah, blah, blah. These are things that we hold dear to our hearts. It's our heritage. But there's been a lot of misappropriation in the fashion industry in the world, which you are very much familiar of. What is this conversation amongst fashion people?
To be honest, and just quite frank, it's entertaining to them, and it always has been. It's a marketing tool. It's very lucrative for them. Like indigenous cultures and cultural ethnicities has always been an inspiration for fashion since day one. Every brand has a collection that looks extremely African, from Dior to Valentino to Jean Paul Gaultier since the 80s. They take these trips to like Kenya and visit Maasai groups and then recreate the prints. And it's just, I don't think that it's gonna change from the fashion world until we start as a whole start making it a problem and start identifying it, because they're doing it every season. This last season, Valentino had a whole like South African beading technique done into their prints. It's funny. I actually Valentino invited me to a private screening of one of their collections that was African inspired, and they thought it'd be a good idea to bring me there because I'm African.
Right.
So that I would come by and see our African inspired collection. I go there, and they had me meet the lady who did the beadwork, and she was like an Italian master beader. And they were like, "Oh, we sent this woman to Kenya, and she spent 2 months learning how to bead from the woman to go and make this collection. Isn't that amazing?" I was like, "Wow." I was like, "That's very shameful, actually." So you sent her to go and learn how to make their products and go back and resell it for a million times more. Like, what did the woman get from this? Like, how much were they paid for the training? And like, why couldn't they be involved in this process?
Yeah.
And so this is like, I've done my part, having conversations, but like, ultimately, like, unless we all come together and stop like supporting that, it won't happen. Like, there was this outrageous yoga company, like yoga sportswear. They went to Kenya and filmed their new campaign. I don't know if y'all saw that, but it went viral like crazy. I'll show you after this. But the campaign was like, it was a group of like 8 white women doing yoga on this mountaintop, right? And they're doing the yoga, and while they're stretching, there's like 8 indigenous looking African women and men like fanning them, like doing their thing, like in their tribal clothing. And the women are just doing their yoga, like, and they use these women as props for the video. It is, if you see it, it just looked so bad, But when that happened, like, it went viral in fashion, and like, people went crazy. Like, they shut the Instagram down and all these things. So it's like, we have to identify and come together and shut these things down as it happens. It's more than a conversation, but it's like you have to report it because it's really bad.
I think as much as we have to report it, we can also just decide to support more African-owned businesses and brands at the same time. It's a two-step process. I think
100%.
The conversation is now. We're starting to have this conversation, but at the same time, these are luxury brands that most of us can't even access. So at the end of the day, what are we doing to further our products, our brands, our culture?
That's it.
I have this conversation so much in the music business. I'll go into a space, maybe I'm recording in Berlin, Germany, and this has happened to me before. Someone will say to me, so what is a typically African sounding drum pattern? And I'm looking at them, I'm like, I don't know what your question means, actually.
At all.
You know what I mean? Because if I needed a typically like sounding drum pattern, I would gladly work with the many drummers in my cultural groups who are available to me at all times. Like, please don't ask me dumb questions. But at the same time, it's because the African conversation is so trendy. Like, I don't respect that. Like,
so trendy.
But here's the thing. We are in a very fickle industry where you could chew it up like bubblegum, the sweetness is done, and they'll spit it all out. What happens at that point? You know what I mean?
Yep.
What happens at that point? So for us as, pioneers and people who are part of the culture, who are developing the culture still, because we're still when I speak of the music industry in Africa, we're still developing. We're at a point where we're just getting our royalties in play. Like, we're just getting publishing now.
It's true.
We're just getting the,
just starting to stream.
You know what I mean? Just starting to stream music. Just starting to stream podcasts. Just.
Yeah.
So what is the correct conversation to be had? As much as we're paying attention to what the Western world is doing with our culture, I think we need to kind of shift it and come back to like developing our culture at the end of the day. You know what I mean? So it's nice that we're here and we're present, but we also need to pay attention to what's still being developed on our side of the world. And it's good to know how.
100%.
You can't just look at one side of the coin and think, oh, they're coming to Africa to know how. We've been coming here.
Been here.
You know what I mean? And we've been influenced by this culture, and we've been a part of the conversation. And we've been, so it's a cool conversation to be had, but it's also a cool conversation for us to take back home.
Absolutely.
And be like, let's stop focusing on what's not ours. Let's focus on what's ours. So I think that's how we should change it. Yeah, so we had a little baby in the room. We love him. He's a little superstar. He's okay now. But as we proceed with our conversation, I just want to, there's the misconception that all Africans come from the same spot and can speak the same languages and refer to the same culture, and we're all from the same type of, no, we're not. As much as we're from the continent of Africa, Ugo is from West Africa, Nigeria, and I'm from East Africa, Tanzania. So it's basically like literally flying from the east to the west coast. Literally. With an even bigger separation, because our different countries, different leaders, different social, classes, and what we refer to as, and you know what I mean? So, different food, different language, different fashion, different prints, a lot of differences. I noticed that a lot of what is trending in terms of like in the African music scene, or rather in the global music scene and in the global fashion scene, is a lot of influences from West Africa in music and East Africa in fashion, but a little bit of both, actually. I think a lot of the prints come from West and East, but in terms of music, a lot of West African music is more of an influence, or more of a trendy space for the global scene. I was watching an interesting conversation between Wizkid fans on Twitter, and they were speaking on his involvement at Coachella. And that's my brother. I respect him a lot. I'm a big fan of his music. I don't know the reasons why he didn't perform on that stage, and even though he was slotted for 2 weekends, I don't know. That's up to him. And, he definitely has his reasons. But there's a larger conversation about how can we be at this space and time and not have people step up to the plate And why did he not show up? And this conversation now had the Twitter fans were talking about there's so many different opinions. But one opinion that stuck out to me is that from the beginning, Wizkid just didn't want to submit to what the Western world or America wanted to give him, in the sense that he was nominated for a BET Award at one point in time. And he refused to show up because he felt as though it was disrespectful for the awards to be given out prior to the main show or not on the main stage. This year, the African Award was given out on the main stage. I think at the BET Awards, or was it before?
It was on main stage.
Main stage. So strides are being made, and certain people have to go through experiences that will kind of change how we're viewed, and so on and so forth. What is your opinion of all of that? And it's a tricky one.
Very, very great perspective. I never thought about. It's interesting, but at the same time, I just think that everyone has to put their ego aside and step to the plate. At the same time, we're not always going to get everything exactly how we want it. But I feel like if we have an opportunity and go in and show out, that's much bigger than having to let your ego make you miss something. Not only with Wizkid, but there's a lot of opportunities that I feel like African artists don't step up to the date that they can. I was at Global Citizen for that festival they had last year.
In Southern Africa.
So in South Africa, yeah. That was amazing. It was incredible. But I don't know, to be quite honest, one African artist did a really great job. Casper killed it. Casper did a great job. I believe the bands did a good job. But ultimately, Beyonce and Usher, they came and brought
so
dynamic performances. Right. They came and brought super. They went all out, and it's there's no reason that Beyonce can come all the way from LA or Usher come all the way from Atlanta and come to South Africa and put together a more unique performance and show.
So I have a different perspective of that, and I'm happy you brought it up. I was at the Global Citizens Festival as well, and I was there from when all of our African acts performed. The only act that I missed was Wizkid. I wasn't in time for his set, but what I noticed was, and I was sitting in the booths at the top, so we are experiencing in full HD. What I noticed what I noticed as an artist and as a performer who also could have been in that position, irrespective of how much I prepared myself. In Africa, on our soil, a concert that was entitled Global Citizen did not show up for the African artists. Why? I listened to the sound that my sister Tiwa had, and I listened to the sound that the artist right after her had. I don't remember who was performing after her. There was an immediate switch in sound, and this is contractually what they call the 70, 80, 100, and blah, blah. They do this for openers and headliners, and the sound changes.
That's messed up.
Now, let me just educate a few people who don't understand this. When you're performing at a concert where there's openers and there's opening acts and then there's the headline act and so on and so forth, contractually they switch up the sound for everybody to highlight one person more than the other. Now, I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't have the contracts. I didn't read them. But I would have thought that because we're on African soil, everyone would have been. Yes, everyone would have been availed the same opportunity.
That's what I would have assumed too.
Right. So it broke my heart a little bit to watch that in that moment because I saw the preparation that each and every single artist had on that stage and what they were trying to do and the unique opportunity that it was. So I refused that they didn't step up to it. I think they did. However, production-wise, I don't think they were given everything that they could have been given. And that's something that we need to change as well.
Right.
So it goes back to this conversation about what are we doing for ourselves? What are we doing to develop our industry? What are we doing to develop our artists? What are we doing when we are given the unique opportunity? I'm about to perform at the Essence Festival this year.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's epic.
It should be epic, and I'm excited. And I'm looking forward to it. But I hope that everything that I can do that's in my power avails me the opportunity to kill it. Everything else, I'm just letting you know I'm gonna kill it.
You're gonna kill it.
Thank you. But if it's other factors that I can't control, I'm just saying that these are things that these are ways that we need to look at how we sign our contracts too, and make sure we have the best of everything.
And it goes down to the management.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
And not the majority of artists don't have a strong team like Miss Vanessa does. I'm very familiar and cool with her team, and they're like army militant bulldogs, and that's amazing. And that's what I feel like a lot of the artists are also missing is people in their team that have one international experience, have the business etiquette and the communication skills. It's but it's a process. I have to, at the end of the day, really commend our talent and our artists, because I've only been around this industry in Africa for about 5 years now, and even in that 5 years, I have seen such huge growth on all around. We are becoming more aware. We are, becoming more accountable and taking those risks, putting ourselves out there. And that's where it really starts from. And I think there's growth for sure.
I love it.
There's a lot of change.
So, Ugo, I want to thank you so much for your input, your time, your expertise, your excellence, for constantly pushing yourself to better the opportunities that you have in your space and otherwise. I know that it's not been easy. I know that we still have a lot to do, but I know that your voice is very, 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 very valued. And I think that in this time, it's important for us to have more conversations like these. And I can't wait to have you on my podcast again, baby. So I'm just saying, follow him. How can we keep up with you?
Yo, I can't wait to come back. What an awesome time. Good vibes.
Yes.
Yo, congrats on everything too.
Thank you.
Everything you're doing inspires me as well. You've always been consistently putting on for the culture. Consistently, and it's beautiful to see you blossom and finally get the acknowledgement you deserve.
Thank you.
You can find me on the usual IG at Ugo Mozie, Ugo Mozie, and from there you can see the rest.
Thank you, Ugo. You know what? I want to, as I leave, I want to impart some Swahili knowledge on you.
Hey.
I want to test your ability to pick up tongues.
Okay.
You'll probably be really good at this, actually.
Let's go.
But I want you to say, and this is an inspirational quote, okay? Haba na haba hujaza kibaba.
Haba na haba hujaza kibaba.
Yeah.
Wait, say it again. I need to say it the full time.
Haba na haba hujaza kibaba.
Haba na haba hujaza kibaba. Hujaza kibaba.
Haba na haba hujaza kibaba.
Haba na haba hujaza kibaba.
And that means a kibaba is like a big water well.
Kibaba.
So a little bit of water, just a little, like a little, and we're gonna get there. So little baby steps. It's about
I love
small steps to success.
Slow and steady wins the race.
Absolutely. That's what it is.
I love it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, love. It was a pleasure.
Pleasure's mine.
Deep Dive with Vanessa Mdee is brought to you by the African Creative Agency in partnership with producer and show creator Amanda Rosenberg.